Well, hello, friends. I hope you're doing well. Welcome back to Autocrit Primer, where we love us some. What?
We like toys, but we're going to talk about some comics.
Yes, and the comic books we're going to be talking about is Diamond Distributors and their bankruptcy. Alliance has now pulled out their bid to buy Diamond due to the fact that Diamond does what Diamond always does, and it is a Ponzi scheme, and it lies, cheats, and steals product. And they had lied about their contract with Wizard, the Coast, and that they were pulling out of the company distributor by April 30th. I thought it was interesting. Everyone's like, hey, if things aren't worked out by the end of April, then it's going to fall through. And I was like, that's odd, because it takes time um, for something like this to take place. You go through the courts, you go through everything, and then I realized, oh wait, they're lying. And I had wondered this. I had said this on another podcast when I first heard about it. I was like, honestly, I don't know how they were able to convince the courts that they had the right to go to Chapter 11 and not Chapter 7. Because they owe a lot of people a lot of money. I had a friend, we had dealings with Diamond early on, and we just decided to become publishers ourselves because it was cheaper for us to do our own work, do everything in house, and distribute it, and get our stuff out there for people to be able to buy if they wanted to, and just bypass Diamond altogether. A friend of ours had done a book, and he got it published through Image, and with all the rigmarole and everything with Diamond, and as he thought that he was finally going to make money, he had to hire one of their inkers, and his book did really well. People knew him, they loved his art style. He was going to go places, and then he was cut a check. He finally thought he was going to be out of the red, and he was told by the publisher and by Diamond, you got to pay this money back in, and he ended up losing money. So his whole project that he worked on, he wrote, drew, and did, um, but he had to hire an inker, even though he could have inked his own work. That's what the rule was at the time. And I wasn't someone that was willing to do that. I like to ink my own stuff. And so uh, he came out and he's like, you know what? You dodged a bullet, man. He says, "Do you believe I'm not making any money off that book I sold, and I had a total of 4 issues. All of them came out on time. All of them sold out. All went to another printing run." And he says, "And I'm not making any money off of it." And I was told, "Well, you don't really make money off the floppies. You'll make money when we do it as a graphic novel. But yet I got to come up with the money for us to put it as a graphic novel." So he says, "I'm not going to make any money." He said, "But you bypassed the floppies and went straight to trades." I was like, "Yeah, because in manga, they don't have floppies. They come out as a whole volume trade, and that's how we decided to do
Tell them
our."
what a floppy is.
A floppy is a paperback that you buy on a monthly basis from your local comic book shop. It has about 20 pages inside
So
of
what do you
it,
consider a comic
and it's a
book?
comic book. We call floppies or a comic book, and so I was like, I'm going to bypass that because you can't make money off of single issues. You can make money off of graphic novels because those graphic novels can be put into online stores. People will put them in your Barnes& Nobles and Books and Millions, which our book did make that. Our book also got put up on Amazon, still there, it says Amazon. And so we have been a independent publisher now for 20 years. And enjoying it like we have. We've always treated it like a hobby and not a die-hard professional thing because we knew how it was to get into Diamond. And everything was, you got to do this, this, and this. And you got to buy in. And immediately, each one of your comic books, you have to have over 3,000 copies ready to go. if Diamond decides they want to take them all. They don't have to. They can take one out of that 3,000 copies that you've got printed. They're only obligated to take one. So you're left with, and another publisher we know whose book didn't do so well, that's what happened to him. He sold 100 copies with Diamond, and he still has 2,900 copies of not one, not two, not three, but 4 or 5 issues. So he has about 10,000 copies total still sitting in a warehouse that he has to pay for so he could get his stuff into Diamond. And I was like, that's just insane. Insane. And taking out another mortgage on the home and everything else. And then we have people that, did covers for us, and they end up getting jobs at Marvel and DC and doing fabulous covers for them now, and even have statues that they, with their artwork that's now been made. So our company was more or less to be based on, we want to make sure that an artist gets, because you can't get into the business and somebody is willing to publish you. And as publishers, that's something that we wanted to be able to do, was have people to be able to say they were published and they could show their work being a published work. That's not how Diamond works. Diamond worked to rob Peter to pay Paul, and they lied, cheated, and stole from publishers and from artists and from people all the time. And people would sit there and say, oh my gosh, we're Thundercats just sold 170,000 copies, and Absolute Batman just sold 100,000 plus copies. We're doing so good. But what they're not telling you is that how many incentive covers did Diamond have for them to make to be able to reach that number? That's what's not being said. And then how many you're going to your local comic book stores and you see those issues still sitting on the shelf? It's because it was they were giving these incentives and deals to the local comic book shops to be able to pick up that cover, and then sometimes they could take that cover and turn around and sell one cover. It was like 1 out of 100, so that means it was a limited edition, so you had to pay $100 to get that one cover. And some people would do that, but all it was doing is causing this Ponzi scheme, this racket, this false inflation. And the only publisher that I know that's actually been doing it right would have to be, in some ways, would have to be Skybound with the Transformers and G.I. Joe. Even though they've gone to 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 15th printing on some of those issues, to get them out there for them to make the money. But the long run is that Diamond has been robbing to pay Peter to pay Paul since the 90s, when you had the bubble pop in the 90s. And when that happened, Diamond decided to take complete ownership of this distribution, and they would have small publishers buy into this idea that, hey, if you got a Diamond, then you made it. You are the big time. You are there. Don't worry about it. You are the big time. You got yourself in a Diamond distributors. You're set. And it was this big lie that they were telling publishers, that they were telling these little guys who are thinking, if I get the Diamond, I'm going to be the next big Ninja Turtles. I'm going to have, my character's going to be as big as the Ninja Turtles. And everybody had this idea because Eastman and Leonard had this great idea with the Ninja Turtles, and they were independent, and they kind of hit the scene just right, and their book took off as an independent publisher. They took off, and with that, Diamond helped catapult that even further and kick the can a lot further for them to sell their characters that had never been done before, other than the big companies from Marvel and DC. And so Diamond used that fandom, that fanboy mentality, that you could be the next creator to strike it big. All you got to do is buy into our propaganda, and when you bought into it, you're thinking in the back of your mind, my characters are just as good, if not better, and I'm going to make it big. And then you had the thing that happened with Image Comics when the big guys left Marvel and started their own company called Image Comics. And then all of a sudden, those guys are striking it and becoming millionaires overnight by create their own creation. And everyone is going, oh my God, I could do that. I can be that. And so they kept this type of fandom where you believed their hype. And people bought into it. And a lot of people lost a lot of money. A lot of money. I know a lot of people that went in debt, took out second or sometimes 3 mortgages on their homes just to be able to hope that they were going to be able to grab hold of that apple pie and be able to be a part of this group. And they thought that if they were going to all these conventions and they were the ones on the other side of the table, that made that they had finally made it and that they were great. And Diamond has lived off of that type of fandom for decades and has had this independent publishers and these little small presses buying into the bull crap that they sell as a distributor. They have not been strong since 2008. They have not been a strong distributor since then. They've been losing money constantly, and I would see horror story after horror story after horror story. And Nikki one time said, hey, I know you really want our characters to be like the biggest thing out there, and that was always your dream, but all of a sudden you kind of like, your idea changed. What happened? And I said, I started talking to reps that was going to represent us and our company at Diamond. And when I started asking questions, okay, you're talking about distribution. How's that going to happen? Is my stuff going to go into your warehouse and you'll have a spreadsheet? You'll tell me how many units is being sold, or how's that going to work? And I was starting to get pushback by me asking legitimate questions about my product, asking them to distribute it for me. Me wanting to know how many units are we going to be able to keep up with? How is it going to be handled if there's damages are done to a box? Because I knew how many times comic books used to come in damaged and beat up boxes into the local comic book stores because of my friends that own comic book stores. And I asked questions and said, what happens if that book comes in and it's, damaged because of the shipment or something? And I got pushback. And a lot of the guys that I worked with, and one group that wanted to come in, it was called Metal Press, was trying to convince all of us to come under this umbrella so that Diamond would look at us even more. And our book and all at the time was the only thing that was literally selling. We would go to shows with the guys, and our book was made for all ages. So that means any grandma, grandpa, mom, or dad comes to the table, they see all these, half-naked women on the covers and everything like that, and they're like, oh, I'm not getting that for my, for my 8-year-old kid. Do y'all have anything that is maybe this kid's age? And we were teachers, and Nikki would be like, well, our book is. I'm an art teacher, and here's how I do the lessons. And our books would sell off because of that, because we made it for all ages. We still make our books for all ages. And then you start to see the dark side behind the thing, where people jealousy and that greed rears up. And then I realized I don't need Diamond. And so when I was getting pushed back from Diamond, then all of a sudden I was like, okay, I appreciate your time. We've decided we're going to go somewhere else. We're not going to use you. Then all of a sudden, it was like spam coming in. Hey, come on now. We can work something out. Do. And then I was like, we just need you to, and they have a contract that you would have to sign with them. And now you're obligated to all the terms in that contract, but there's a loophole for Diamond where they will not be held accountable for a lot of the stuff if they could categorize it underneath different categories of mishandling or damages and other things. And you start looking at that and you're going, as an independent publisher, I'm not willing to put that much money into a project that I'm not going to get any guarantees on the return. You're the one that's getting all the benefits, and the mentality was always, well, we're distribution, we're bigger, we're better, we're greater, we're going to give you more exposure, and that wasn't the case. And when I told Nikki, I was like, yeah, we're done. We're not going to go through Diamond. And Nikki was like, oh, okay. And then Diamond started really cutting out a lot of the independent publishers that wasn't willing to now buy each issue. It now shot up. You had to have 10,000 copies per comic book to have at their distribution center that you pay for to get it there, and you pay for it to be printed. And then a lot of the little publishers that were only doing maybe 2,000-3,000 copies were now no longer going to be in Diamond Distributors previews. And then you had a lot of guys come together back in 2009, I think it was, and they started trying to have their stuff through other independent distributors to distribute their small time press. But at the end of the road, you could see the as a small publisher, you could see the light. You could see the light at the end of the tunnel. The catastrophe, the nuclear explosion. It wasn't a light to go to something that was good. It was a nuclear blast that Diamond was doing to itself. And you were seeing that light, thinking that, hey, that light at the end of the tunnel is a good place I want to be. But when you get there, you're getting nuked in radiation and you're completely dead. And that's what they were doing to the small publishers. And I am so glad that we dodged that bullet. But a lot of people we know did not dodge that bullet. And a lot of them ended up, getting a little bit of fame and a little bit of a base. But one thing we noticed that when we got sick and our health went bad and we weren't able to be at it constantly and grinding at the mill, that little fame you thought you had, it went away. People didn't stay around and still buy your stuff. They didn't. If you weren't going to every show and doing everything all the time, 100, and it was a 365-day grind, and then you had to go do shows and you had to work your full-time job. That little bit of fame went away quickly, and that was a humbling experience for me as a publisher. And I had always said, and I told my friends who own comic book stores, I don't know how long you think Diamond is going to be able to last, but the numbers per issues that are being legitimately bought out of the stores is dwindling smaller and smaller and smaller by huge percentages. And Diamond is giving y'all this number, and they're lying to you. They're lying that many copies are literally being bought by people. They're being bought by the comic book owners, but they're not being bought by people. They're lying to you. And I'm worried that when this actually unfolds and happens, y'all are going to be the ones that are going to be the ones that's going to not be paid, because Diamond's going to do what it can to get its money. And you, as the owner of Diamond, know who I'm talking to. I'm not going to mention people by name, but you know who you are. You know how many people you've ripped off. You know how many people you lied to. And you know how many people you stole from. So for me, personally, I hope Diamond burns to the ground. I think it's the only way to give a wake-up call to the reality of the world in publishing. And it's funny, I go back to Egon Spengler when he said in the Ghostbusters movie, print is dead. And he said that in the 80s. It was to tell you the numbers aren't there. People don't read. They want a quick TikTok. They want something they can get in 30 seconds. And that's the crying shame. At the end of the day, a lot of great creators lost their publishing, lost their butts on this dream that they were going to make it big. Well, yeah, I know, like the Ninja Turtles and like Spawn, Wildcats, Youngblood, Savage Dragon, Shadowhawk, Wetworks. How many of those are those companies, are those big time artists that made it big and have made money off of their creations? How many of those creators are actually still producing? And that'll give you the idea of how much really is being viable as a creator. Because right now, the only one that is producing, I mean, Savage Dragon is on one heartbeat from having total being in cardiac arrest. I mean, he's pushes out his book very, very little bit now. I think Todd McFarlane has pushed his book out just to be in spite of all the big publishers. But Youngblood, Wildcats, Brigade, Supreme, Shadowhawk, Wetworks, how many of those books are still in publication? That should give you the idea of how much you're really making. Because if those big guys can't keep their books going nonstop without a break, that lets you know that the sales aren't there. That's just food for thought. Y'all have a good one. Talk to you later.